Добрый вечер. В эфире программа «Время». В начале выпуска коротко об основных событиях
In the
дня.
beginning, in this edition, briefly about the main events of the day. Grozny today again was subjected to missile bomb attacks. The State Duma did not adopt the draft budget for next year. From the 1st of January, the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange is imposing a maximum limit in the vacillation of the rate of the American dollar. Silvio Berlusconi, the chairman of the Ministerial Council of Italy, today submitted a notice of resignation. Law enforcement organs for now have not explained the reasons for detaining Dmitry Yakubovsky. His attorneys have arrived in St. Petersburg. As Intervox reports today, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chechnya reported that at the night of the 22nd of December, Russia has resorted to massive bombings of residential quarters of Grozny. 60 missiles and bombs were dropped on the city. There are 100 casualties, including 17 children. 250 people have been injured. This is said in the appeal of the chairman of the Foreign Affairs of Department of Chechnya to the UN and the CSCE and the world community. Well-informed sources in the Russian leadership confirmed today that since 5 o'clock this morning, a massive bombing of the capital of Chechnya is underway. Today, chaired by the first Vice Premier, Alexis, a meeting was held in which the members of the government, the Security Council, and representatives of the President's administration participated. At this session, they discussed the situation in Chechnya and actions undertaken by the President and the government to restore constitutional lawfulness and provide economic aid for the Republic. While the State Duma of Russia is concerned with preparing yet another draft, this time in connection with the resolution which contains a warning to the countries of the near-abroad countries on the impermissibility of interference in the internal affairs of Russia in view of the events in Chechnya. The situation in the conflict zone from dramatic is gradually growing tragic. Each day the lists of those killed, injured or missing Russians is increasing, notwithstanding what their ethnic origin is, Russian or Chechens. The last 2 weeks have demonstrated that even the instructions of the President Boris Yeltsin on the unwavering compliance with the entire scope of the application of the Russian Constitution on the territory of Chechnya no longer has the force which it could have had 2 years ago. Units of the Russian army and internal affairs at times don't know how to act in that unusual situation, and not because the command authorized to conduct a military operation always lacks precise instructions from the high leadership. The main reason in this situation is the fact that Russians in military uniforms face not enemies or adversaries, but also Russians who simply have become hostages of the situation. As is reported from the Press Center of Internal Affairs, Dudayev's military supporters attempting to prove the thesis that Russian leadership is waging war against the Chechen people brutally are dragging the peaceful population into armed resistance, fighting under the shield of old people, women and children. This was confirmed, for example, by the clash near the Cossack village Petropavlovskaya. Combat reports of both sides from conflict zones are naturally contradictory. For example, the headquarters of the Chechen Armed Forces states that at night on Thursday, Grozny again was subjected to air bomb attacks, and one of the bombs landed in a residential home. According to the press service of the Russian government, last night, operations continued to disarm unlawful formations. Bombs were dropped on strongholds. The city, Grozny, was not subjected to bombings. Although through the efforts of gunmen, bombings were simulated in residential quarters. But during the day, evidently, this was not an imitation. During an intense bombing, there were casualties among foreign citizens as well. And so today, on one of the streets of Grozny, an American woman photojournalist was killed. Despite the various interpretations of events in Chechnya, probably it will not be easier for our soldiers or the ordinary citizens, far from the ambitions of political leaders. But the blood of Russians, unfortunately, continues to flow, as evidenced by the report of my colleague, Natalia Prokofyeva, who spent an entire week in the center of these dramatic events. The day before yesterday in our program, news was reported that in Chechnya at Petropavlovskaya, while coming into landing, a medical helicopter was shot down, which was to evacuate injured. Among casualties, 2 medical doctors were named, but this news, reported by an agency, included an error. While it was being aired, one of the doctors, the senior lieutenant of the medical services, Vladimir Yermolov, was in the operating room of the hospital of the Pan-Russian Center of Medical Disaster Defense. These were difficult moments. Many knew Yermolov personally and the killed Major Pakhlubin. But At this time, the major's life isn't in the clear? Not yet. They spoke of a crew which perished as the best of those involved in the evacuation of injured. Doctors are calm today for the life of Vladimir Yermolov, but his spine has been damaged. In the report on the helicopter's destruction, there was one more slight mistake. It truly was being flown with doctors to evacuate injured, but this was a military helicopter without the identifying symbol of the Red Cross on board, and now it's pointless to discuss is the Red Cross protection or danger. The Service of Medical Catastrophes is involved in other regions adjacent to Chechnya. The first aid brigades, 150 of them, are constantly on duty with 6 helicopters, and it seems all of this will be needed. According to physicians' calculations, and I emphasize this is unofficial information, in Chechnya yesterday 60 were killed and many more injured. The press service of the government today refuted news that the Minister of Defense, Pavel Grachev, ostensibly removed from commanding the operation in Chechnya the commander of the Northern Caucasus Military District, Alexei Medyukhin, his first deputy, Vladimir Chelegin, and the commander of the headquarters of the North Caucasus District, Vladimir Potapov. These generals continue to fulfill their duties and are heading the operation to restore constitutional order in Chechnya. When the program had begun to air, we were receiving from a channel from Nazran material from our special correspondents who were in Grozny today and returned to the Ingushetian capital. Now it's being prepared and we'll return to it a little later. A convoy of the International Committee of the Red Cross through Nazran to Grozny delivered surgical apparatus in a volume sufficient to provide emergency medical aid for 700 injured. Also, Intertas reports that the International Committee of the Red Cross is carefully following the situation of refugees from Chechnya, specifically in Ingushetia and Dagestan, and plans to send aid for thousands of resettled individuals who found refuge there. In Dagestan, during the last 2 days, the flow of refugees has decreased drastically from Chechnya. And so during the hours that our film crew was located at this main immigration path, it's not far from Khasayurt, they were seeking asylum with their neighbors, and they were only a few families from Grozny and other centers with military activity. This can be assessed as the repercussions of the decision of the State Council of Dagestan, at whose extended session a resolution was adopted on additional measures in order to tighten the protection in the Republic of the national border of Russia. But a special regimen, incidentally imposed for 1 month, does not apply to refugees in any case. It was imposed with the aim of preventing the penetration of extremist armed groups into this area and weapons, not only from Chechnya but other adjacent countries, Azerbaijan and Georgia, and also via sea. And this is why today there was such strict control over the movement of transportation. And at this part of the road closest to Khasayurt, the Rostov-Baku stretch, and at other basic and circumventing transportation routes. The priority, immediate mission of the Internal Affairs, of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Minister of Internal Affairs, Viktor Yerin, said is to restore constitutional lawfulness in the Republic and ensure rights and liberties of the citizens on a territory which is an inexorable part of the Russian Federation. The minister spoke today at an extended meeting of the Ministerial Council of Internal Forces. A significant part of the Chechen Republic is being redirected along peaceful tracks. This was said to the press today at the Press Center of Information within the administration of the President of Russia, the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs, the Colonel General Alexander Kulikov. He said that in regions where Russian forces have entered, patrol brigades of the Ministry of Internal Affairs are beginning to work, and together with local residents, the normal militia departments will be created. There were no losses among the Russian militia there. Participants of the press conference, and including the acting head of the Department of Information under the President's administration, were interested in the question of effectiveness of security measures undertaken in Moscow. For several days in Moscow, there were essentially no clashes initiated by the criminal element. Secondly, yesterday, for the first time in the day, we recorded 0 murders in Moscow. The number of stolen vehicles has drastically reduced. And now watch the report which we've just received from our special correspondents from Grozny. Last night, Grozny was bombed from the air and was shot at from tank artillery. Especially the center of the city was affected, and the residential block in the first subdivision. In this zone, destroyed were multi-storied homes and single-family homes. There are no official facts on the casualties among the population after the night bombings, but it's known that there are serious injuries. Since morning in Grozny, cannonade was heard from the village Petropavlovskaya, where artillery is actively deployed. Today, at the fringe of the city, a Chechen who was passing by the village and shot by snipers was buried. In Grozny, there are reports about clashes near the town Yermolny and the Cossack village Asinovskaya. During the day today, the center of Grozny was overflowing with residents, but at approximately 12 o'clock noon, when next to the homes destroyed last night, the film crew from the program Time was located. Over Grozny, an airplane appeared. Just now, the city Grozny endured another raid. There are injured among the population. However, it turned out that after the missile attack, the airplanes of the model from the design office Sukhova, which bombed the home downtown, 10 pedestrians were killed. Later, these facts were confirmed by the film crew of the Reuters agency. Today, refugees from the city are moving along one route, yet unblocked by Russian forces. A family of Russian residents of Grozny, who we met here, being evacuated by a Chechen whose relatives have all died, is fleeing from the constant blows by Russian aviation. The chairman of the Federative Council, Vladimir Shumeka, feels that Russia possesses all the characteristics of a federation, which, despite the contradictions of federal asymmetry, there is a guarantee of equality for all people and citizens. This, the Speaker of the Higher Chamber of the Russian Parliament, stated at a meeting of the leadership of the chambers with the chamber with the heads of diplomatic missions in Moscow. In the strict proper auditorium of the Federative Council, today 4 languages were heard. At a meeting with Russian senators, here were the heads of diplomatic embassies and missions. Currently, in Moscow, there are 150 of them accredited. These are representatives of the United States, Great Britain, and France, and other well-known countries, as well as countries with such exotic names, such as, for example, Cabo Verde or Antigua. The chairman of the Federative Council, Vladimir Shumeka, shared with the diplomats certain assessments and positions which the Senate of Russia occupies in the contemporary political life. He stated that the Russian state is striving to keep up with the times in cooperation and harmony with the world community. Regarding the events around Chechnya, Vladimir Shumeka emphasized that in any interethnic conflicts, the Federative Council advocates talks. Our position was defined regarding the Chechen Republic, that is, the defense of citizens from violence, even through force and weapons, dialogues with Chechnya only as with the subject of the Russian Federation, and shield the Republic from external interference. The State Duma voted today for a joint session to be held next Saturday with the Federative Council on the situation in Chechnya, with an invitation to the President and Prime Minister. In this connection, Boris Yeltsin sent a letter to the deputies. He informed them that in the next few days he intends to address the citizens of Russia with his assessment of the events occurring in Chechnya and also plans in regularizing the conflict using primarily political methods. The President also asks deputies of the Duma to re-examine the question of holding a joint session with the Federative Council. Boris Yeltsin expressed hope that in this complex, dramatic situation, the deputies will demonstrate wisdom and restraint appropriate for the State Duma. At today's session, again, the contours were sketched of the uncompromising conflict of parliamentarians with government. This was manifested in the voting on the basic financial document of the country, the budget. Not ratifying it yesterday, the deputies deferred the decision to today, and instead of the planned 10 minutes, the Duma devoted several hours to discussions. But despite the work of the Conciliatory Commission, the number of deputies negating the financial policies of government turned out to be more than supporters. Parliamentarians did not want to adopt the budget under any circumstances. Unexpectedly, it was suggested to interrupt the session so agrarians and communists could correlate their positions. And after the Agrarian Communist Council, the opinions of the factions on the principal question remained unchanged. We cannot vote for this budget, which proliferates the decline of productivity and plans it at 15%. This means the full destruction of the base of the economy of the country and the further degradation, mostly of agricultural industry. Currently, we must concentrate efforts not on developing some sort of a rosy budget, which will never be adopted here, but the agrarians will vote for that budget, which was submitted as a draft. The basic differences among deputies were generated by the proposed 2% increase on tax on additional cost, and through the money realized support for domestic industry in the social sphere. The agrarians demanded these funds be allocated for preparing for the spring sowing. The government, in the work of the Conciliatory Commission and here in speeches in the State Duma, has already exceeded the limit it should have stayed within in the way of softening the budget. Slogans alone are not enough to raise productivity. We must work, that's absolutely right, but not only verbally. Despite agitation and active clarifying work among members of government, the deputies were unyielding. Several bouts of voting were without result. And according to regulation, they could have declined the budget simply using the formula to be sent for more work, but the deputies simply didn't adopt it. As a result, the government draft was suspended in mid-air. And now, a repeat of the scenario of this year is quite possible when instead of a budget, gradual, phased financing of the country was discussed, and such a law in the Duma was already prepared in advance. The State Duma today did not confirm the deputy powers of Sergei Mavroti, who was elected in the Matishinsk electoral district number 109. Ivan Rybkin instructed his deputies, Mikhail Mityukov and Valentin Kovalyov, to jointly with the legal department of the Duma to study the situation and at one of the sessions of the chamber to expound its point of view. It's no secret, this was said quite often, that the budget does not realize the revenues as is usually planned. At today's session of the Cabinet of Ministers, it was noted that to blame for this was the growing activity of certain joint stock companies. Their operations on a non-bank market using currency allow significant sums to escape government control, hence are not taxed. Among such joint share companies are the Department of Tax Police, called the MMM, the Russian House Selinga, Russian Fixed Assets, and Rapura Invest. Discussing the problem of the budget for next year, the government decided to undertake certain steps. It intends to decrease the unique law, specialists call it an excise, on vodka and other strong alcoholic beverages. In other words, domestic alcoholic beverages will be cheaper, and there will be more sales, and with increased productivity, the Treasury will receive more revenue. Also, it's planned to step up the battle with contraband of imported alcohol. Today, the real revenues of the population of Russia are 70 to 75% of the levels of the revenues of 1991. This was told to Itartas by the Minister of Labor of Russia, Gennady Melikyan. According to him, the most serious decline in the revenues of Russians was observed in 1992. Later, they slowly but consistently increased. Today, at the usual trading on the Moscow currency exchange, the rate of the dollar rose by 27 points and comprised 3,454 rubles for $1 American. From the 1st of January at the Moscow exchange, a maximum limit for the vacillation in the rate of the American dollar per ruble during a single session will be introduced, which is 10% of the rate at the initial opening of trading. In the event during trading the limit is reached in the rate, this will be announced on the floor to participants and a technical break will be announced. Then the directors of the exchange will officially inform the Bank of Russia about the situation and further will act in accordance with its instructions. The Moscow region, Zhrebina, in the morning was awakened by the sounds of a brass band. The culprit, the firm Glav Bulgarstroy, which laid the first block in the foundation of a new residential complex in Moscow. Bulgarian builders are famous in Russia and the republics of the former Soviet Union through their building of villages for the military, and now are executing an order for the government of Moscow. Here in Zhrebina, a so-called monolithic home complex with better planned apartments will be built. If we say briefly, a monolithic home is the best idea yet in the world for such climactic conditions as in Russia, and the words improved floor plans speak for themselves. The entire residential subdivision will be occupied by those on lists for housing in Moscow. Glav Bulgarstroy received the order through winning a tender of the Moscow government. The decisive factors were time limits, quality, and prices. The infrastructure of the region will be built simultaneously with the homes, and that means that while apartments are being occupied, stores, schools, and various life services will open their doors. I think that by 1996, we will finish completely the entire structure. And we'll ask our Bulgarian friends that they should do this in the summer so that we could manage to occupy the apartments and children could begin to go to school and nurseries in the beginning of the school year. I think that we'll manage that. A Russian transportation plane, N-124 Ruslan, which delivered cargo to the American Air Force Redstone Air Base on the 21st of December, has absolutely no relationship to the air forces of Russia. An official representative of the Minister of Defense emphasized in an interview to Interfox that planes of the Russian Combat Transport Aviation made no flights to the international airport in the city, Huntsville, the state of Alabama, from whence to the American military base a certain secret cargo was rerouted. Today, the newspaper Washington Post reported that the plane delivered a system of anti-aircraft defense to the United States. To whom it belongs and who sealed this contract is not known. Today, as expected, the chairman of the Ministerial Council of Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, gave the president of the country his notice of resignation. As is reported, this decision was made at today's meeting of the Ministerial Council upon the results of parliamentary debates and in light of the new political situation. The current government crisis occurred after the camp of the cabinet of the opposition was joined by one of the largest parties of the parliamentary majority, the League of the North, and the government coalition in essence collapsed. Now, without the former majority in parliament, a vote of non-confidence is becoming unavoidable to the current government. As became known, the president Scalfaro, with restraint, reacted to the announcement of Berlusconi and instructed him to continue to fill his post of Prime Minister to complete current matters. The special representative of the UN Secretary General Akasi, who arrived in Sarajevo, held talks with the Muslim side. Tomorrow in Pali, he should meet with leaders of the Bosnian Serbs. In an interview, the diplomat stated that he now has hope for an imminent ceasefire and that this was achieved mostly because of the visit to Bosnia of the former American President Carter. Today, Romania is celebrating its 5th anniversary of the December Revolution. Since morning, crowds moved toward these tombs of those who, by their lives, paid the price of freedom. 1,104 people died in the revolutionary days, and 160 of them on the 22nd of December. All these years, people demanded that the terrorists be found and punished who shot into the crowd after the overthrowing of Ceausescu. But it turned out that this was no organized action of a terrorist. On the eve of the celebration, speaking to the journalist, representative of the Parliamentary Commission inquiring events of December 22nd, 1989, said that the death of many people was caused by the lack of coordination and confusion when some fighting against dictatorship without knowing clashed with others of the same camp, sustaining losses and perpetrating unbelievable rumors. This is the statement in the investigation of the Prosecutor General, the results of which were announced in today's newspaper. But even such a sad admittance didn't change the attitude of the people to the fallen. Today, throughout the country in churches, for those who fought for freedom, services were held. The country honored the memory of its heroes. There were also political rallies where representatives of the opposition asserted that the same communists are still in power and demanded that the revolution stolen from the people be returned. The United States have achieved Pyongyang's consent to return the surviving helicopter pilot who was shot down over North Korea. North Korean military today conveyed to the American Army the remains of the dead pilot. Regarding the second member of the crew, who is under investigation, official Pyongyang positively reacted to the United States' demand to return the survivor and expressed confidence that this will occur in the near future. A firebomb exploded in a subway train at Fulton Station stop in the southern part of Manhattan, New York. As the police representative stated, as a result of the explosion, 37 were injured. 4 of them are in critical condition. Officials, for now, have refused to issue suppositions regarding the motives for this terrorist act. With rare unanimity in our days, the directors of several Russian newspapers and television and radio stations condemned the draft law on advertising developed by the Anti-Monopoly Committee. I'll remind you that it was adopted 1 week ago in the first reading by the State Duma. The speakers here noted that in the event that this draft law does pass, and it absolutely ignores the opinions and interests of professional journalists or advertisers or advertising producers, then the bureaucrats of the Anti-Monopolist Committee and the government will receive an opportunity to, in essence, control the press, because the majority of articles in the draft law can be interpreted in several ways, and the judges or arbitrators will be those same bureaucrats from the Anti-Monopoly Committee. It was emphasized that the full ban on advertisement of tobacco or alcoholic products and several other bans will lead to a decrease in advertising revenues by 1/3, and this will be the reason for the financial collapse of many sources of mass media, and will deal a blow not only to independent mass media, but state mass media, whose needs the budget allocation stations do not cover at all. As a result, television programs will be impoverished. There will be no money to purchase films or other attractive programs. Journalists have asked the deputies to consider the opinion of the professionals, adopt an alternative version of the draft law, and avoid bureaucratic red tape tendencies. The lawyer, Dmitry Yakubovsky, is detained for 30 days pursuant to the decree of the President of Russia, dated the 14th of July of this year, on the battle with organized crime. Interfax was told by the prosecutor of St. Petersburg, Vladimir Yeremenko, the reason for the detainment of Dmitry Yakubovsky of scandalous renown today remained secret and obscure. Employees of Special Services of Petersburg refused to comment at all. But the fact was not refuted that General Dima was detained by law enforcement organs of Petersburg and escorted to the city on the Neva River. But where the scandalous Dmitry Yakubovsky is located now, not even many employees of the Bureau know. One may presume that the fate of Yakubovsky is being decided not in Petersburg, but in the government corridors of the stone-white Russian capital. The ascent of the colorful general, his involvement in the scandal with the firm Siabek, exposure of the corruption of former high-level representatives of government are not forgotten by many. And if Yakubovsky himself asserts that he has partially lost his memory, then probably the main heroes of exposures have not lost theirs. Certain people comment the detainment of the attorney with the theft of the unique manuscripts from the Russian National Library, and this explains why Yakubovsky was arrested by Petersburg employees of law enforcement. But this is only a supposition. And what else can one do if both the militia and the counterintelligence have placed a veto on information? On the instructions of the government of Moscow, from the 23rd of December until the 19th of January on Tverskoy Boulevard, Christmas will be celebrated. Daily concerts, fairs, and sales and other trade and recreational measures will be planned, and basically celebrations will be oriented toward children who the day after tomorrow will start their winter holiday. Never before was our favorite Tretyakov Gallery so pretty, and now truly this museum ensemble, the old memorial building, the engineering corps, and the depository can be the pride of the capital of Russia. And the collection assembled by the great citizen Pavel Mikhailovich Tretyakov seems to have been rejuvenated. Yes, they did attempt to preserve the old distribution. The portrait of the brilliant Prince Kuryakin is on the same spot as Tretyakov determined. But beside it, for the first time, a unanimous portrait with a rose is displayed. Liritsky, recently purchased by the gallery. As usual, the Berlov Hall is magnificent, and the Verslavia looks like it just came off the palette and easel. Such a brilliant restoration. The genius of the Ivan Argunov is represented now in his first, most naive paintings, also restored, a mystifying woman in a Russian costume, and his latest panneau. It would seem that we know almost everything about Alexander Ivanov. Several generations of visitors of the Tretyakov saw this panneau of the great Russian artist, but now an entire hall was devoted to Ivanov. Incidentally, a new one previously here was the inner courtyard of the museum, and now tens of never-before-seen etudes are situated together with the painting. And this largest auditorium was also non-existent before. It was built on the site of another inner courtyard, especially for Verburn, specifically for his never-before displayed panneau, the Princess Gruda. And here it is, restored and for now on a roll, but for it a frame, because it is of grandiose dimensions. It would seem that everything is ready to welcome visitors, and that is scheduled for the end of December, but there are climactic problems, and climate is one of the essential conditions for the well-being and life of the paintings. We feel that the first visitors of the gallery must be children, and the State Commission did not endorse the opening, but we've decided to organize the visit by children to the gallery beginning the 29th of December for a few days during school holidays. Well, this is truly a New Year's present for the children. In half a minute, Ilya Kukin will give you the sports news. With this, I bid you farewell. Goodbye. Hello. The majority of athletes in the entire world are already on Christmas holidays, but the masters of the white circus, as the World Cup alpine skiing is called at times, are laboring by the sweat of their brow. Most successful is the Italian Alberto Tombo. One day before, he had made himself a 27th birthday gift with a victory in Austria on the slalom course, and today he's in the Italian Alta Bazzi and was again first on the giant slalom course. The leadership of Tomba in the World Cup is unrivaled with 550 points. Only a few weeks ago, we followed the finals of the Davis Tennis Cup, and now the Russians are preparing for a new cycle. The first match in the beginning of February in the Belgian Diere with the hosts of the court. Today, the Belgians announced their team members, and objectively, this team is weaker than ours. Its leader, Philippe de Wolf, is only 134th world seed. And soccer stars, as previously in the center of the press's attention, the Bulgarian Christos Stoichkov continues to celebrate his award, the Gold Ball for the best player of Europe, but in a work setting. The awarding of the prize to Christo was done before a 100,000 auditorium in the Barcelonian Stadium, Camp Nou, on the eve of yet another match in the Spanish Championships. And at this stadium, for the last 4 years, he's been a star of the Catalonian club, but this time he wasn't able to bring joy to his fans with a score. The king of soccer of all times and people, Pelé, is more actively trying himself out on the political stage. Evidently, with pleasure, he accepted the invitation of the president of Brazil to head the Ministry on Youth and Sports Affairs. Well, in addition to the presidency of the Santos Club, now the king will have many more concerns. Briefly about the matters in the NBA Championships. After the victory yesterday, again in the first overall place is the Orlando Magic team, and one victory behind is the Phoenix team.
You can do, I can do better. He drains the bomb. Spurs.